just wanted to draw attention to the information that's in the back of your handout about reporting. So I can speak to you in depth about Delaware law, and I will give you just a brief overview about that, but I have been told more than one occasion that I should not speak in any jurisdiction that I don't know well. So, those of you from Maryland, there's a handout with some information about reporting and how the report form, the links to follow. So Delaware, we have one central reporting line. Maryland, you have to report to the jurisdiction. So that link will help you figure out where you should make the report to. So I list the 1-800 number. There was a packet for folks who are from Delaware that was, it's a resource from the Office of the Child Advocate, which goes through reporting, your responsibility, the law. It really gives you a lot of great information. I tried to find something like that for Maryland, but I was not successful, and so I apologize for that. So just information that it's great if you have this information, right? So when you make a report and call the hotline, so you want obviously the child's name and any other information you have about them, their date of birth, their address, any information you have about their parent, where the child is, what your concerns are, and things are a little bit different now. If you haven't made a report ever or you haven't made a report recently, they are starting to ask questions a little bit differently. So one of the questions that they should ask you is obviously what are your concerns, but what are the strengths that you see in the family, and what would you like to see happen? And the reason they ask this question is because they really are trying to focus on families' strengths. And typically people who are reporting have a lot more information about families than you might realize. So they're going to ask some different questions. And because they try, people will say one of two things for me. DFS doesn't do anything, or DFS rips babies out of parents' hands. That's, people usually are on the two extremes. And they really are in the middle. And so they really do try to figure out what kind of intervention is needed and how best to serve the family. So don't be shy about sharing any information you have about a particular family if you're making a report. The other thing that I tell people is if you're not sure, just call the hotline. They will be happy to tell you that that's not something they investigate, or you don't have enough information for them to make a call, to investigate. Because if you look at the law, it says you're mandated to report suspicion of abuse. It's not your job, and there's no exceptions in Delaware. Everybody's a mandated reporter. You are protected under a clause, so nobody can sue you for libel or slander. They would have to prove that you made the report to be malicious. And also the last piece says that you can be fined up to $10,000 for the first offense or $50,000 for the second offense for not reporting abuse. So if a child discloses to you and you don't report it and they tell somebody else, oh yeah, I told Miss Kelly, and there's no Kellie Turner made a report, I'm going to get in trouble. And there's a whole unit at the Department of Justice now that investigates that. So, so you just want to make sure that, again, your job is just to report suspicion. It's not your job to investigate. They will be happy to tell you. I've called many times and they say, Kelly, you know. And I'm like, I know, just write my name down. Because sometimes what happens is I call and I don't have enough information, but then Michelle calls and then Mike calls, and all of those calls helps them say, oh, okay, we need to elevate this and look into it. These are the objectives. What you'll see is that the curriculums are built to stand alone, but also to build upon each other. So there's a lot of repetition. You're basically saying the same sorts of things every year. You just expand on them a little bit differently. And that is very purposeful, because I always tell people by the time I get to 6th grade, I basically want them to be able to do the program for me. Right? Because then they've got that information, and really what you're focusing on is really application and making sure that they know how to apply these skills that you're teaching them. So you can go through these and read these for yourself. Some of the differences, as I said, when you get to fourth and fifth grade, you'll start talking about child abuse, how to set boundaries, and as Michelle said, there's always, the faith piece incorporated in that. And I think that is so important to give that perspective. It's great that Michelle's son had that opportunity because, and I'm sure he's getting it at home too, right? Because every person who's delivering the message is going to do it slightly differently. And when a child, and then other adults in the community are hearing, oh, the church is talking about this, oh, the school is talking about this, oh, the family's talking about this, this just makes kids safer, right? It's going to make it harder for adults who want to hurt children to have access to uneducated children because they're getting it in so many different places. The other thing I think is really awesome about coming from the faith perspective is that that's one of the things that I have often heard from survivors is, why did God let this happen, right? If there was a God, why? Why do bad things happen if there's a God? And so this just opens up that conversation in a safe place and really helps sort of allow kids to think about that in a different way. So I think it's really an opportunity that kids would be really grateful for and welcome. All right, so the common topics that you're going to hear are this uh-oh feeling. We talk about that in every grade because it's very important. We talk a little bit about safety rules just in the younger grades, and then they kind of drop off. We will obviously be talking about private places and touches in every grade. Even in 7th and 8th grade, you still want to make sure. It is surprising to me sometimes how many older kids don't realize what their private places are. And then, as I said, once we start in 4th grade, the 4 types of child abuse. So I'm going to go over the common themes with you, just to sort of give you that perspective before we go into the curriculum. So what we tell the younger kids is there are 3 safety rules for them to follow, and they are say no, get away, and tell somebody. So when we go over the say no part, what you'll see with the little kids is we try to make that as fun as we can. So if somebody's hurting you, how do you say no? Do you go, no, don't do that? You say no, you say loud and strong like you mean it. And so we do that lots of different ways. You can have kids come up and you can demonstrate that with them. You can have them say it as a class. That's always my fun when I was in the schools. And you go in a kindergarten classroom and be like, all right, everybody, let's say no together, nice and loud. And the teacher's like, oh my gosh, we're making too much noise. But just to help them practice being assertive and saying no. The second one is get away with you when you can. And it is important to spend some time with this. So, this doesn't mean, so what I do with my 1st graders is I have a little 1st grader come up with me and I say, okay, let's pretend we're standing in line. And I'm behind you, and we're going to go out to recess, and I decide to pull your hair, and I usually try to pick a child who's got some nice long hair, and I decide to pull your hair. What would you do? And this is great, because some of them just look at me, and I'm like, what would you say if your friend pulled your hair? And some of them will say no, or stop, or don't do that, and I would say, we practice doing that, and I say, okay, so now we're standing back in line, and I do it again. Now what do you do? And we go over saying no again. And then I say, now, could you use your getaway rule here? So can you just run out of the classroom? Or can you just run out of the school? And all good 1st graders say no, because they're rule followers at that grade. You ask a 6th grader that, they're like, heck yeah, I'm out of here, Your 1st graders, no, they know to follow the rules. So we can't always use our getaway rule. You only use the getaway rule when it's safe. So you might get out of line to tell your teacher that this person is hurting you. But the most important rule, if you can't say no, because sometimes we always can't say no, if you can't get away, because sometimes it's not okay or safe to get away, is to tell a safe grown-up as soon as you can. So really, for the 3 safety rules, the rule you really want them to hear is to tell a safe person. We do want to teach kids to be assertive and to say no and how to do that, but the message is really that always tell a safe person, and it's never too late to tell a safe person. So then we're going to talk to them about public and private places. So for the little kids, you might do this with the older kids, but by the time you get to 6th, 7th, and 8th, you really just want to do a little refresher about how many private places they have. So you would say there are 2 kinds of places on your body. There are public places and there are private places. So public places are places that we see and that it's okay for people to touch without always asking. Now, you have the right to decide who touches you, so people should ask before they give you a touch, but if they pat your head or pat your back, those are public places. Private places on your body are places that are special and that no one should touch without a good reason. So for us, in this purposes, what we do is we say your 4 private places are your mouth, your chest, and the 2 areas covered by your underwear. That's how we say it. What you will see in the parent information, and what if you are having any parent conversations, you want to encourage caregivers to teach their children the proper terminology. Because when you have slang names for your private places, this confuses folks. And to be 100% honest with you, it makes prosecution difficult. So one, the thing that you might hear in various trainings is sometimes people refer to their private places, to their vagina, as a cookie. And so you could have a little kid say, "Daddy ate my cookie." Most people will think you're talking about Oreos, and they will say, "Oh, it's okay to share your cookies with Daddy." So if you don't have a common language, you're basically telling a little person it's okay for them to be sexually abused. So it's not anybody's fault. If you don't know that's their language, which is what sex offenders are banking on, then nothing can be done. So we want to teach parents that it's very important that they teach their children the proper terminology, so that will be a deterrent from abusers hurting their children, but also, God forbid, something happens and they decide to tell, everybody's very clear on what they're disclosing. Does that make sense? So even in 2022, with everything that's happening, you can see all sorts of things online, people are still not comfortable with folks telling their children that they have penises and vaginas. So, the decision has been made from my organization not to fight that battle, just to give the kids the information and really encourage the folks that have other influence on children and families to give that message to folks. They are not bad words. It's just like your nose, just like your toes. We want to really make that language common for everybody. It will just increase safety for children. But for your purposes, 4 private places, mouth, chest, 2 areas covered by your underwear. They all know, they giggle, ha ha ha, and you move on. All right, and don't get upset when they giggle, right? Because again, we don't want any anger around this issue. You can say, "I know it's embarrassing. This is not something we usually talk about at church or wherever, but it's really important that you have that language, you have that information." So then we talk about 3 kinds of touches. And let me tell you, the touch research is crazy, because if you were around in 1987, 1990, most of the curriculum said good touch, bad touch, and confusing touches. Well, confusing touches is confusing for everybody, but particularly first graders. And so there was a lot of conversation about touches. And then people went back to good and bad touches. Well, there's some very sad things about good and bad touches that I always feel it's important to impart to people. Sexual abuse for little kids often doesn't hurt. It's usually fun and exciting, and they are well rewarded for it. So if you teach a 4 or 5-year-old that a bad touch is a touch that hurts, which we do, and don't teach them anything else, they will not associate sexual abuse with a bad touch because it doesn't hurt them. So we have gotten away from that. So we use 3 touches. There's a good touch. Good touch is any touch that feels good, that you're happy to get and you're happy to give. And we'll go through how more interaction with that. A bad touch is any touch that hurts you, that you don't want to get and you should not give to somebody else. And then a secret touch is any touch you are told to keep secret. And the thing about secret touches is if anybody gives you a secret touch, you have to remember that's a touch that must be told. So if somebody hits you really hard and says, "Don't you tell anybody," that's a secret touch. That means you need to tell. If somebody touches your private place and says, "Don't you tell anybody," that's a secret touch. That's a touch you need to tell. So that's very straightforward and usually much easier for children to understand. Okay, the other piece that's really important is that you let kids know that they get to decide who gives them touches and what are good touches for them and what are bad touches for them. And we'll go through that a little bit more through the curriculum. But it's important that they get to decide about their touches. And I know that in families, that's not okay. You know, that in some families, if grandma wants a kiss, you kiss grandma. You don't have the opportunity to say no. And I understand that, but we still want to give that message to children, and then this is an opportunity. So if a child goes home and says, I don't have to kiss you, and somebody calls you up and says, why are you telling my kid they don't have to kiss me? That gives you the opportunity to impart really important information. So it's the same thing, you know, you can use the same example I gave my husband. If you force people that you feel are safe to your child to hug or kiss people that they're not comfortable, they're not going to be able to discern who's safe and who's not. And so I had this conversation with my mother because you did not say no to a grown-up in my house. And so my mother came, took care of my youngest, and she would leave, and I'm from New Jersey, and so she was going home to New Jersey, and she would say to my youngest, or to my little one, she would say, okay, give Nana a kiss. And again, at this time, my little one was 2. What do 2-year-olds say when you say, well, give me a kiss? They say no, because that's their favorite word. No, no, no. And so my mother would start it, oh, no, you don't say no to Nana. Give Nana a kiss. I'm not going to come back if you don't give Nana a kiss. And I would have to step in, you know, which, again, culturally, from your defining using culture as your family, really hard to do. But I would have to say, Mom, in our house, she gets to decide who she gives kisses and hugs to. And she doesn't want to hug you right now, or she doesn't want to kiss you right now. And then I would say, so that's how it has to be. Now, of course, the first time I ever said that to my mom, we had some words. But that just became the norm in my house. And everybody knows now you ask before you touch somebody, and if they say no, then that's okay. I have to remind my husband on occasion, but he knows generally the rule. And it's very funny, because my kids have heard that so many times. My little one will say to my husband, what do you do when somebody says no, Dad? You stop. Like, so they know the rule, and that's what you want that to be. Just like you get in the car, you put your seatbelt on. You ride your bike, you put your helmet on. Somebody says no, that means no. And that's how you want this information to be. And so if a parent has some concerns, just share that with them, because they are not going to be able to know the difference between having to kiss Nana and having to kiss somebody at school. They're just not going to be able to do that. And if that's your norm and that's what you teach them, you have to kiss an adult who tells you, that asks you for a kiss, that's their norm. They're not going to be able to decide who's good, who's trying to hurt them, and who's not. They need to have the ability to say no. Because as an adult, what that will do for your knowledge, so that will do one of 2 things. So somebody who potentially wants to hurt your child, they say, no, I don't have to kiss you. My mommy told me, or my grandma told me, I don't have to kiss you. That sends a message to the offender. Okay, this kid has information, they're assertive, they've been told to say no, probably not a child that I want to pursue, right? Or then hopefully that child will go home and say, you will not believe what happened today. Mrs. So-and-so said this to me, and then you as an adult can intervene and just sort of get your feelers out to see what's going on, right? So it's just another layer of protection for children. And it's important to try to help adults see that. If you let your kids say no to you, they're still perfectly polite children. You can ask my very sassy 3rd grader, if you go to her school and ask her teacher, she will say she's a delightful child. And every time she tells me that, I say, are you sure? All right, secret touch we talked about. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the 4 types of child abuse. So we'll go through this in the curriculum in more detail about how to make this a little bit more interactive. So when we talk about child abuse, we talk about the 4 types of child abuse. We tell them physical, sexual, emotional, and neglect. And we go through each of those. And in the interest of time, and so we don't mess up lunch, I will just do that in the demonstration, and then we can talk about it if you have any questions or concerns. And then we teach them that there are 2 never-ever rules, right? So child abuse is never ever your fault, and child abuse is never ever okay. And with all kids, depending on how many times they've heard this, you really want to, once you start talking about child abuse and defining that, you really want to let them know that there's nothing they could do. I always tell people you could burn your house down. It would not be okay for somebody to physically abuse you. I tell them, the older kids, you could walk around naked. It would not be okay that somebody sexually abused you. So child abuse is never your fault, and child abuse is never okay. Because as I said before, perpetrators of abuse are really good at convincing children that it is their fault that this happened to them. Okay, any questions? All right, we are gonna dive into this script. See, I was gonna have a break here, but that's okay. All right, so we're gonna do 4th and 5th grade. If you want to follow along, you can, and that way you can take notes. Whatever your learning style is. All right. Yes, ma'am.
When you're doing one of the things that is hard.
So the question was classroom management. Like, what do you do with a kid who just won't stop asking questions? So I'm first going to put that back to all our seasoned teachers. What do you do with a child who doesn't stop talking? Okay, so if you have somebody else, maybe they can help address sometimes. Sitting next to the child helps. With that, anybody else have other suggestions? Okay, so if they're at the level where they can write their questions down, that keeps them busy. Anybody else? That's a great suggestion. So there's lots of strategies that you can use. And so this is something that comes up with my team all the time because I teach older kids. I said that's so I have no problem ignoring children. And, and for some folks, they're like, what? What if they have something they need to tell you? And I'm like, what have we learned, right? If a child really has an issue, wants to disclose abuse, they will do it. I promise you. I have had kids take 3 weeks to tell me, but they will tell you, and you want them to do it at their own time. And so for my group, what our job is to give them information and to really encourage them to have more timely discussions with folks they have more access to. So for you guys, it's the same thing, You can, I think it's how you set it up too, right? So you could set it up as, this is going to be something that a little different than we usually talk about. It is just really important information, and so there's going to be opportunity for questions, but I'm going to keep them limited so that I can make sure we get through everything we have to do. So if I don't answer your question, it doesn't mean it's not important. It just means that I can't do it right now. So write it down if you can. And so that's for children who will raise their hand and not call out, right? And so there are some key things you want to stay away from, right? So you don't want to talk about your dog with little kids or your animal or anything about your family, because if you start doing that, what happens? I have a dog, I have a cat, we went on vacation yesterday. And so little kids are fantastic at just veering off of here. And so again, I am like, that's really important, but we have to move on. And I will talk, I'll give them a minute, and then once I realize, this is not going to stop, I'm like, this is so important. I'm so happy that you had that, but we really have to go on to this. And so I think it's your comfort of either ignoring children or just starting to talk over them. I think the Post-it notes are a really great idea. I know that some people use balls and things, or the sticks. You can only talk if you have the ball or the stick. And I think sometimes moving kids around or having them sit closer to you. But if you have a kid who just keeps interrupting, I think that it just comes down to ignoring them, but then later trying to figure out what was motivating that. Was this really an uncomfortable conversation, or is that just their typical behavior? If I have a kid, I don't have this opportunity, what we do now, but you guys might. You might know that there's just a child who just likes to talk, and so give them a job. Your job is to hold on to the crayons, or your job, something to sort of distract them, to make them feel important so they don't have to interrupt you. Other thoughts? So is that an answer that you're okay with?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
I just want everyone to be aware that it happens.
Oh,
every
yes.
time it just happens and be comfortable with
Right.
it.
Yes, it happens less with the older kids. It's sort of, the little kids are easy because they'll just start talking about their dogs and their moms and what happened yesterday. The older kids will sometimes just jab you with some questions to throw you off kilter. And so I don't really have, like, it's just one of those things where you gotta keep yourself together and move on. It doesn't, even with the older kids, that doesn't happen very often. Usually they'll just totally disengage from you. And again, you have to decide, do you really want to spend all your time trying to engage that child, or do you want during the class, or do you want to try to figure out what's happening in a more private time with that person? Because even kids who look like they're disengaged, unless they're sleeping, and I have been in classrooms where children are sleeping, unless they're sleeping, they are listening to you, they are hearing what you're saying, they're just not engaged. So don't get discouraged by a child who doesn't look like they're listening to you. You'd be surprised. I actually have learned that best with adults, because I have taught so many classes where I swear that the person is doing their grocery list or sleeping with their eyes open or on their phones, not paying a bit of attention to me, and then all of a sudden they're like, hey, and I'm like, oh my God, you are listening to me. So, don't be discouraged by kids who aren't totally looking like they're engaged. All right, other thoughts or questions real fast? Yes?
What's the ideal number of kids you would do this training?
Oh, that's a good question. So for us, our rule, for lack of a better word, we go into schools it is classroom based. So however many students are in your classroom, we try really hard not to double classes up, because the more kids you have, the less interaction you're going to have. And we absolutely positively will not do assembly styles. This is not an assembly conversation. So, you don't want, and I know that all the parishes are different, so you don't want, ideally you want a few more than 5, because you do want it to be interactive, but I would try not to go over 30. Because, like I said, the larger, particularly for little kids, it is really hard to keep 30 little kindergartner, first graders engaged. You got to be doing all sorts of tricks and songs to keep them engaged. And then as they get older, they're just less likely to ask questions and participate, and you want to make sure that you're giving them that opportunity. Yes, ma'am? Okay, so the question is, should we do these classes some of the parishes are having families more involved, so should we do these classes with the parents, without the parents? So my answer is always, if you can have the parents participate, that's awesome. Because here's what's going to happen. In most situations, if a parent is abusing the child's not going to participate. They're going to be sick that day. Because they don't want them to have that information. What the bigger issue is I think is setting the parameters with the parents about their participation. So I would just have a meeting and be like, this is, what we're gonna do. This is really focused for the kids, and I'm sure you have great information. So I would use this as you take notes about what I'm saying so that you can carry this conversation over at home. And I'm just going to ask that you really don't participate at all. And that's hard for some grown-ups, because some grown-ups feel like, we should participate to be a model, but to let them know it's okay for you just to sit back, you're modeling listening. That's your job, to model listening. And not to participate, because we really want the focus to stay on them. Sometimes when grown-ups participate, it intimidates them, and the kids won't get the same experience that if you're just, observers, quiet observers, and I will be happy to answer any questions that you have after we're done. So just to really set that parameter. I think having your caregivers involved is really a great opportunity for everybody. Now, I will say though, if you have a parent that you can't manage, there are those parents who just don't care what you say. They're going to do what they want anyway. Then that might be a situation where you don't have any parents involved in that particular classroom. So it's not you can't participate, it's just nobody's participating, which is unfortunate, but you trying to manage a parent and teach this is going to be really difficult. And I also think you can you can say that to the parents as well. This is a really important topic. I need to have all my focus on them, and I need your cooperation. And most parents are happy not to participate. Kelly, as the teacher of you are 4th and 5th graders, be kind to me, but be 4th and 5th graders. All right, so that's the other thing. I am going to do this like with interaction, so I'm just going to repeat what you say for our filming purposes. All right, hi guys, how you doing today? Good, all right. So today we are going to talk about relationships, and we're going to be talking about them probably in a way that we usually don't talk about them. But as you know, God created us to love, right? And then he created relationships so that they would be fruitful and positive. Now, I bet you can all think of some positive relationships that you have, right? So think in your mind, who's somebody that you have a positive relationship with, and what makes that relationship positive? So we're just going to think about that. All right. Now, sometimes when we're in those relationships, are we always perfect? No. And so sometimes we make some mistakes, and sometimes we do things that aren't nice or kind to the people we're in relationships with. And when that happens, what do we try to do? We try to say sorry, we try to make amends, right? And we try to repair those relationships. But sometimes relationships aren't positive. And God has created us, has given us the ability to make choices and have freedom. And so sometimes we make those bad choices. And so today what we're going to talk about is what happens when we're in a relationship where somebody's hurting us. And so it's important for us to be aware that sometimes grown-ups hurt kids. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So we want you to be aware of what that means and then what to do if that happens. Sorry, I see this is where I have to look. So it's important for us to remember that our bodies are the temple of the Holy Spirit, right? And we need to take care of our bodies and respect our bodies because they're sacred, right? So what's another sacred place that you know? Church, right? And when we are in church, we demonstrate what? Respect. And so when we're thinking about our bodies as a temple of the Holy Spirit, we need to demonstrate respect to our own bodies, but we need to be respectful to others' bodies. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. All right, so when we're talking about our bodies, and sometimes when grown-ups hurt our bodies, that is called child abuse. Have any of you talked about child abuse before? At school? So raise your hand if somebody's talked to you about child abuse before. All right, so you know what you guys are, right? You are my experts. So when I have asked questions, who's going to answer those questions? My experts and anybody else who wants to. But if you've already had these conversations, it's important for you to share what you know with your friends. So using your fingers, tell me how many kinds of child abuse do you think there are? So if you think there's 1, you put up 1 finger. If you think there's 10, you put up 10 fingers. There's no more than 10, so you don't need any more fingers. How many do you think? Everybody put up your fingers. I see lots of different answers. I see 5, I see 2, I see 4. Well, experts, what's the answer? 4. So there are 4 types of child abuse. Raise your hand if you can tell me what one of those are. The name of one. Yes, ma'am. Physical abuse. Very good. Who can tell me another kind? Emotional abuse. Very good. Who can tell me another kind? Neglect. Excellent. Most people forget about neglect. Excellent. And what's the last one? Who forgot? So negative, yes. Every abuse is negative, absolutely. Who can tell me the next one? The last one? Sexual abuse. Excellent, good job. So we're going to talk about what those are and what each of those mean. So the first one we're going to talk about is emotional abuse. Now, sometimes people talk about emotional abuse as verbal abuse or mental abuse, but we're going to use the word emotional abuse. So emotional abuse is when the grown-up who's in charge of you, mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, whoever is in charge of you, says mean, hurtful things over and over and over again. So they tell you things like, you're so stupid. Why can't you do anything right? You're fat and ugly. Nobody's ever going to love you. I wish you were never born. I hate you. They may call you terrible names. Now, they're saying these things over and over and over again. So why do you think saying mean things to you would be abuse. Because it makes you sad. Who can tell me what color the wall is? You're like, what? What color is the wall? Are you sure it's beige?
It's a light color.
Is it blue?
No.
Are you sure?
Yes.
How do you know it's blue? I mean, how do you know it's not blue?
Because I know what blue looks like.
Because you know what blue looks like. How do you know what blue looks like?
Because I learned it in kindergarten.
Because you were taught it, right? So if somebody's teaching you every day that you're stupid, or you're fat, or you're ugly, what do you start to believe? That you are. So when your grown-ups are saying those mean, hurtful things to you all the time, it changes how you think about yourself, and it hurts you on the inside. So it's not causing marks on the outside, but it's hurting you on the inside, and it's changing how you think about yourself. So sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, right? We talked about relationships. God wants our relationships to be fruitful and positive, but sometimes we make mistakes. So sometimes your grown-up might be having a bad day, and they might say something like, why can't you do anything right? If they say that once in a while, and it doesn't really affect the way you change, that's not abuse. They made a mistake, and sometimes our grown-ups will even apologize to us and say, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, I was having a bad day, I shouldn't have said that. But if the grown-up is saying those things over and over and over again, and it's making you feel sad, scared, or worried, it's really important to tell a safe grown-up. So I usually say, are there any questions? You can decide for yourself and your comfort level and the audience that you're working with if you want to say, are there any questions? Or do you want to wait till after you've done all four to ask those questions? So the next kind of abuse we're going to talk about is physical abuse. So physical abuse is when somebody hurts your body on purpose and causes an injury. So that's if somebody hits you so hard they leave a bruise, give you a black eye, or a broken bone on purpose, okay? So abuse is not you're outside playing football and you're growing up accidentally, you're going for the ball and hits you in the face and you get a black eye. That's not abuse because that was an accident. But if somebody's really angry at me and hits me so hard that there's a bruise on my arm, then that's abuse. Who can tell me what your conscience is? Oh, sorry. Who can tell me what your conscience is? You're like, what? What is your conscience?
It's a voice that tells me right and wrong.
So it's your voice that tells you right and wrong. Now, do we always listen to our conscience? No. So what do we call it when you make a decision, a choice that you know is wrong, but you make it anyway? So your little voice is saying, ooh, bad, bad, bad. But you say, yes, yes, yes. What is it called? Sin. And do we all make sins? Yes, we do. So what do you do? What do we have the opportunity to do when we sin? Say we're sorry. And what can we do? What does the church allow us to do? Reconciliation. Now again, you have to adjust. This is 4th and 5th grade, right? So reconciliation. So we have that opportunity to ask for God for forgiveness for our sins, right? So physical abuse is a little bit different, right? So we're not talking about situations where physical abuse, it's never okay for somebody to abuse you, right? So this is not a situation where somebody is making a bad choice and it's okay. It is never okay for somebody to abuse you, and if they do, it's important for you to tell a safe person. Now, sometimes folks ask me, what's the difference between physical abuse and punishment, right? So the difference is punishment doesn't hurt you. It doesn't cause an injury to your body. So let's see if we can figure out the difference between those two things. So let's say I'm having a bad day at school, and I come home, and my mom says something to me, and I get really mad, and I start yelling at her, and I call her a bad name. And she gets so mad at me, she hits me in the face, and I have a bruise on my cheek. Is that abuse or punishment? That's abuse. Who can tell me why that's abuse? Because she left a bruise, right? Let's say, different day, I come home, having a bad day, I yell at my mom, I call her a bad name, and she says, that is not respectful, you cannot talk to me that way, you need to go to your room, and I'm going to take your phone. Is that abuse or punishment? Punishment, right? So it's a consequence for making a bad choice. Now, let's say that I have a little brother who's 2, and he hit me, and I hit him back. And my mom said, she hit my hand, she said, you can't hit him, he's too little. Now, there's no mark. Is that abuse? No. All right, let's take a vote. Who thinks that's abuse? Who thinks that's punishment? Very good. So sometimes our grown-ups make that choice to hit us. And if they do and you're not sure about that choice, you can always talk to a safe grown-up about that. But what you really want to think about for that moment is if somebody hits you, is there a mark? Did they cause an injury? Did they give you a black eye or a broken bone? If they did, then you make sure you want to tell your safe grown-up about that. Any questions? I'm going to be brave. Okay, so as a little timeout, I will tell you, usually for 4th, 5th grade, they don't ask, but sometimes this is where you'll get your stories. Like, what if? And so when a child says, what if, you got to make a quick decision in your mind. So you say, oops, we're not going to do any what ifs right now. You can write your what if down or you can save it for me after, but we have so much we need to talk about. We're going to keep going. Okay? But you can sort of decide that for your group if you want to dive down the what if road. But I will tell you, when you do what if, there's a lot more to follow. So either just be thoughtful, but that is where you will typically get your most questions, and you will get your most information about families and their cultural beliefs around hitting. All right. The next type of abuse we're going to talk about is neglect. Does anybody know what neglect is? Let's see what you know, because somebody said it, so they know something about neglect.
It's when we don't give children the things that they need.
Right, so it's when kids don't get the things they need. So, I really need to have a new Apple phone. So I need to have that. So I didn't get that. Is that neglect? No, right? So neglect is when you aren't getting the things that you need, your basic needs. Who can tell me what those things are? Food, shelter, clothing, right? So when a grown-up is not giving you the things that they need on purpose, then that's neglect. So let's see if you love should absolutely be. It is one of those things for children that is abstract. And so that I feel like is one of those things as adults we have to pay attention to, the interactions between their grown-ups and their children. Okay, so I'm going to give you a few examples and you're going to see if you can tell me if that's neglect or not. So there are these wonderful Air Force One shoes that I want to have, Nikes. They're $100. And my mom said, nope. Is that neglect? No. Why is that not neglect? I need to have shoes, don't I? You said clothing. I need to have shoes.
You can have a $20
Right. So if my mom says, no, you cannot have the Air Force Ones, but you can have these $20 Converses over here, I'm getting what I need. I need shoes. I just don't need to have $100 shoes. That make sense? Okay. So I came home after school and mom just for yourselves too, try to stay, and I'm not doing a very good job example right now, try to stay away from mom and dad. A lot of kids don't live with their moms and dads, so I always don't know what's wrong with my brain today, but try to use the word grown-up. So I come home and my grown-up has left cookies on the table. So I think, cookies on the table, I can eat them. So I eat all the cookies. And when my grown-up comes home and says, where were the cookies? We were supposed to take those to school for your event. And she gets so mad at me, she says, you ate all the cookies today. There's no food for you tomorrow. What is that? Neglect. That is neglect. Why is that neglect? Because food is a need and I'm not getting food at all for the whole day. That would be a need that I'm not getting. If she says, you ate all the cookies today, no dessert for a week, that's a consequence, a punishment. That's not neglect, right? So neglect is when you're not getting the things that you absolutely need, food, clothing, shelter. It's not when you're not getting the things that you want. We all want stuff. We can't have everything we want. All right, and the last kind of abuse is sexual abuse. And sexual abuse is anything dealing with the private places on your body. So, using your fingers, how many private places do you have? Everybody should have their 4. Very good. So you have 4 private places on your body. So sexual abuse is anything dealing with those private places on the body, your body. So if somebody asks to see your private places, wants to touch your private places without a good reason, forces you to touch their private places, says something about your private places that makes you feel uncomfortable, or shows you pictures of somebody else's private places. So sexual abuse is all of those things. Now, there's something different about sexual abuse. Physical abuse, neglect, and emotional abuse, all are when the grown-up who's in charge of you are doing those things to you. Sexual abuse is different because, unfortunately, sexual abuse can be committed by anybody. So sometimes it's a grown-up, but sometimes it's another child. So if anybody touches your private places without a good reason, and we're going to talk about those reasons in a minute, that's sexual abuse. So it doesn't matter if you're another child, doesn't matter if they're a grown-up, that's still sexual abuse. So there's a couple of things that I want you to make sure that you remember is that no one should touch your private places without a good reason. And there are 2 reasons it would be okay for somebody to touch your private places. Does anybody know what they are? Right. So you guys did perfect because that's what they all say, doctor. So it's not the person, right? But it's what they're doing, right? So the 2 reasons is they're trying to keep you healthy or they're trying to keep you clean, okay? Any questions about sexual abuse? And usually, dead silence. So you guys are right on cue there. All right, so we did that, we did this, okay. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the different parts on our bodies. So we have 2 places on our bodies. We have public places and we have private places. Public places are places that are okay for people to touch without always asking. So who can give me an example of what their public place on their body might be? Your shoulder. Head. Hand, your back, right? So this is sometimes where people will pat your head. I'm a head patter, or pat your back, or give you a high five. Those are public places. But it's important to remember that you have the right to decide who touches you and how they touch you. So if you don't want somebody to pat your head, it's okay to say, no, please don't pat my head. Well, then we have these places called private places on our body. Have you guys talked about private places before? Yes, we know we have 4 private places, and those places are so special that no one should touch them without a good reason. And what are those good reasons? Keep you clean, keep you healthy. So your private places on your body are your mouth, your chest, and the 2 areas covered by your underwear. And you all did a good job, no giggling. Very good. All right. Sorry, I'm having some... Let's make sure that we understand those 2 reasons for why it would be okay for someone to touch our bodies. So, anybody in the room have a baby brother or sister? Well, probably not. Let's just pretend. Yes, I do. Okay, great. So, when your baby brother or sister has a dirty diaper, what happens? Somebody changes it, right? Now, when somebody's changing your brother's dirty diaper, do they have to touch his private places? Yes. Is that okay? Yes. Why? Making sure that I'm clean. Let's say that I fall down. I am running and I fall down on my bottom. And I have this big cut on my bottom. And my grandmom cleans it off and puts a Band-Aid on it. Is that okay? Yes. Is that abuse? No. Why? She's keeping you clean and healthy. Now, let's talk a little bit about your mouth. Is your mouth a private place? Yes. Now, the reason your mouth is a private place is because you get to decide who you give kisses to. So, when you go to the dentist, does the dentist have to touch your mouth? Yes. Is that okay? Because they're keeping you healthy, keeping your teeth in your mouth healthy. How many of you, anybody in this room, ever had a cavity? Uh-huh. And what happens when you have a cavity? You gotta get a needle, it's a whole thing. And does it feel good? No. So can you say, I don't want to get my cavity filled? Well, you can say that. Right? Right? Now, somebody would say, well, that person's touching a private place and they're hurting me. Is that abuse? No. Because you have to remember, even though it's going to hurt for a little while, they have to do that to make sure that your mouth and your teeth are healthy. Now, if you're concerned about getting a touch or you're getting your cavities filled, what should you do? You want to make sure that you talk to your grown-up. You're still going to have to get that cavity filled, but you can still talk to your grown-up about how you're feeling, about being scared, and hopefully they can help you, feel a little bit better about getting your cavity filled. Any questions? Yes, ma'am. That's okay.
My question is, are there two kinds of hugs?
Oh, that's perfect. We are going to go. We are going to talk about that. That is the next thing on our list to talk about is the different kinds of touches, right? So touch is a gift from God, and it helps us enjoy and experience His amazing world, but it also helps us know when things are dangerous. So anybody ever roasted marshmallows over a campfire? Right? How do you know where you stop when you are approaching your campfire? How do you know? It gets hot, right? And that's your sense of touch. You know it's too hot, we stay away, that's as far as we go. So touch is a really important component to keeping us safe and also enjoying our beautiful world. So there are 3 kinds of touches that we're going to talk about, and this might be new for some of you. The first kind of touch is a good touch. And a good touch is any touch that feels good, that you like to get, and is okay for you to give. Who can tell me an example of a good touch? You like to be tickled. I hate being tickled. What else? High five. Hugs, kisses, right? So these are all things that we typically identify as good touches. But I heard a tickle, right? So we're going to come back to that. What is a bad touch? Anybody know? Right. A bad touch is anything that hurts you, makes you feel sad, scared, or worried, and is a touch you shouldn't give and you don't like to receive. So who can give me some examples of bad touches? Punch. Kick. Slap. Bite. Pulling your hair. All bad touches. Now here's the crazy thing about touches, is that touches change. So you like to be tickled. I do not. So if we said tickling, raise your hand if you think tickling is a good touch. Raise your hand if you think tickling is a bad touch. Right? So that's an example where touches are different for different people, and we have to respect that. So if somebody does not like to be tickled, then we don't tickle them, because for them that's a bad touch. Now, sometimes you might receive a touch that you like, but it might go from a good touch to a bad touch. How does that happen? Right. So if you like to be tickled and you're enjoying it, but then they're tickling you too much, or they tickle you too hard and it starts to hurt, then that good touch became a bad touch. And so for hugs, as an example, right, I am not a big hugger. I don't really like to get hugs. I don't really like to hug. And that's okay, because you get to decide what are good touches for you and what are not good touches for you. It's just important to let people know that. So sometimes, most people in my life know, oh, not to hug Kelly. Nope. They'll say bye. They often say to me, I would hug you, but I know you don't like to be hugged. And that's okay. That is fine. And so sometimes, you have these situations where you just let people know what your touches you're good with, and then they should respect that. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. So did that answer your questions about 2 kinds of hugs, or were you going in a different direction I missed?
Well, when I was teaching, a careful of a front-on
Oh,
hug
okay, yes.
or more to the
Okay.
side, so it's not.
Yeah. So what we tell kids, right, so what we tell kids is really they get to decide what's comfortable for them. So for hugs, if you want to, you just happen to say tickle and that made me go, I usually use hugs, is that a hug goes from a good hug to a bad hug, or, good touch to a bad touch because somebody either hugs you too hard or hugs you in a way that you don't like. But us for grown-ups, I just generally tell people that touch is important to children, and I know that different organizations have different policies around touching children, but children need to be touched appropriately in nurturing positive ways. So, if you are going to hug a child, it is best to do that side hug. Now, when you are working with kindergartners, they are not about the side hug. They are just like, and they just hug you up. And I do not oh no, emergency, get away from me. And I don't think anybody here would do that. But just to be thoughtful and mindful about how if you're hugging kids, how you're doing that. Particularly if you're working with the older kids, they're less likely to do that, and the side hugs are okay. And I just worry that as adults sometimes we think too much about touching kids. If you have an 8th grader who's crying their little eyes out, this might not do it. But you have to know for you and that child what's comfortable for them. Other strategies as adults to make sure everybody is safe is you make sure your doors are open. If you have another adult in the room or other kids in the room that can observe, you want to make sure that your interactions with children are observable and interruptible. And then you use your judgment to meet the needs of what your kids needs. It worries me when I hear people say we can't touch children. That is just not good for them emotionally. And I think after the pandemic, kids really do need to learn how to be socially appropriate with each other, and we are still their best models. And with that being said, yes, right. That's my 2 cents about hugging kids. So we talked about good and bad touches. Did we do secret touches yet? No, not yet. See, this is the beautiful thing, right? You don't have to be perfect at this, and if you're talking with kids and you do a little deviation and you don't remember where you are, it's okay to say, hey, did we do this already? And they will quickly tell you, yeah. Okay, so secret touches. So this is a little bit different, and some of you may know about secret touches and some of you may not, and that's okay. So secret touches are any touch that you're told to be secret, to keep a secret. So if somebody hits you really hard and says, don't you tell, that's a secret touch. If somebody touches your private places and says, don't you tell, that's a secret touch. And so the thing about secret touches is that you can't keep them a secret. They need to be told. So if somebody gives you a secret touch, what do you need to do? You want to make sure you tell someone. Good job. Any question about touches? Okay, so when we're thinking about touches, and we talked about the fact that sometimes a good touch can become a bad touch, or what's a good touch for you might be a bad touch for me, we have to be able to set boundaries. Do you guys know what boundaries are? Anybody want to guess about what a boundary is?
My personal space.
So right, most people think about boundaries as their personal space, but just generally boundaries is a defined area. So if we think about this room, what are our boundaries of this room? The walls, right? So that lets us know what space we can stay in. It keeps people out. It lets people in. It defines that space. And that's what our personal space is. It's the amount of space that we're comfortable being, having people come into that space. So for most people, we go like this. How many of you have heard about your personal bubble, right? So it's this hula hoop space around you. But the thing about personal space is that it's different for everybody, and sometimes it changes based on who that person is. So, who would like to volunteer? That's basically what 4th and 5th graders do. So if you don't volunteer, I will pick somebody. Okay, thank you. I want you to come here. All right, you can stop there. What I'm going to do is we're going to see, remind me of your name, I'm sorry. Teresa. What Teresa's personal space is. I'm going to walk close to you. When I get close enough, you tell me to stop. Okay? Okay. All right, well, I'm going to stop.
I'm Italian, so I'm a hugger.
Right, so
Okay, and I have very
close personal space. Okay, so this is beautiful. It's not going to happen with 4th grade, so hold on. So what's usually going to happen is you're going to get to...
All right, now I will not be
Okay.
Okay.
Well, it's fine, because I want to do it for you as you're going to see most, and then we'll talk about this. Okay, so you're going to tell me right about here for most 4th and 5th graders.
Or that I might do that.
Well, okay, so right, so some kids, like I take one step, they're like, because this is a beautiful example of power, and they're like, oh no, you can't come any closer to me, and that's all great. And so we talk about how, because Teresa and I don't know each other, that's why we have so much space. And what I would typically do was ask the person who came with Teresa, or I would say, try to pick kids who who their friends are, and have their friends come up and do the same thing. And then what's going to happen is you're going to let that person get a lot closer to you. And then so we say, okay, so why do you let some people get closer to you than others?
I don't know you.
Right.
So.
Okay. So it depends on how comfortable you are with that person. Now, if a child says to you, I grew up in a house where we love to hug each other and people get real close, that's a wonderful opportunity to say, and that's exactly right. Because for some folks, people can get real close to them and they're very comfortable with that, and that's their boundary. And for others, they want people they don't know far away from them. Sometimes they want people they know far away from them as well. And that is all okay. Thank you very much. What happens if I am walking towards Teresa and she tells me to stop, but I keep going after she's told me to stop? What happens then? You're invading her personal space. And so that's called a boundary violation. Now, what should we do when our boundaries are violated? You want to speak up, right? So do you have to be rude and disrespectful? No. So if I got too close to Teresa, what do most people do when you get too close to someone? They back away, right? So that's a nonverbal way of saying, whoa, whoa, you're getting too close to me. And what should we do? Again, thinking about our bodies being sacred and temples for the Holy Spirit. What do we do when somebody says to us, okay, you're too close? What do? We stop, right? So it's our job to respect other people's boundaries. So if you're going close to somebody and they're backing away from you, you need to respect that boundary and stop what you're doing. Now, what should you do if somebody continues to do that? So you could get away and tell somebody. You want to let somebody know that your boundary is being violated. Is there something you might do first? Right, because sometimes people come from different families and cultures, and for some people, they're just used to being real close to you. And just because you backed up, they didn't even notice. They just keep coming because they want to be close to you. They don't realize, they're not trying to be mean, they're not trying to be disrespectful, they just don't realize that you're trying to set a boundary. So then what would you do? So I just keep coming closer to you because I just want to be so close to you. Okay, so you might say stop. You could be like, you know what? I don't like people that close to me. Please back away. And you want to set that boundary so that people understand that you're not comfortable with them getting that close to you. Now, if I still keep coming closer to you after you've said no, you've set your boundary, you've explained to me that I don't want you that close to me, what should you do? Right, you want to get away if you can, and then you want to make sure that you tell that grown-up that person keeps violating your boundary. So I think something that I see all the time with your age group is your phones. So let's talk a little bit about that. So let's pretend that you're looking at your phone, and I'm your very good friend. and I come and I grab the phone out of your hand. Let me see what you're looking at. I want to see your Snapchat. I want to see the Instagram. I want to see that TikTok. And they grab the phone out of your hand. I grab the phone. I'm your best friend. Is that a boundary violation?
Yes.
Yes. I think that most of your 4th and 5th graders are going to say no. And they're going to say, no, we went that way. So you say, no, you're my friend. Right? So I get that I'm your friend, but should somebody grab something from you, even if they're your best friend? No. And they are violating your boundaries. And that might be a situation where you don't feel like you can say, hey, that's my phone, don't take it. But it's an opportunity for you to set that boundary and say, you know what, that's my phone, you can't take it without asking. Now, your friend might make fun of you for doing that, but it's important that you set that boundary. And it's better to practice setting boundaries with your friends because they can help you practice. Now, if your friend continues to take your phone, what should you do? You should tell somebody. I'm telling you, your 4th and 5th graders are not going to do that, but it's just, again, to plant those seeds about thinking about things. So in your, just a little timeout, in your binder, there are some examples for them to practice boundaries, if boundaries are being violated or not. So there's a couple things that you can do. Because this is 4th and 5th grade, you can do the first 4 in 4th grade, the second 4 in 5th grade. You can put them on cards or popsicle sticks and have them grab, pick them to practice, to tell you the answers. You can do it as a large group activity. The other thing that you can do is use them as examples, not all of them, but some of them. Do the phone one with them. Somebody takes a picture of them without asking, because that's something that's happening all the time with kids. How they can set that boundary with pictures of people taking pictures and posting it, those kinds of things. And that is going to go in a direction. If you start that can of worms with the pictures and the phones and TikToks and Instagram, it's going to go in a direction. So you just want to make sure that you're comfortable having that direction, that you have time to do that. If you don't, stay away from those examples, because they are fruitful and really important conversations to have. But just like anything we do, we have to make decisions about what we need to focus on. Sometimes when I go into schools, if something has happened in that school, or I will deviate a little bit and use that as an example. Before COVID, there was a TikToks challenge where kids were asking kids to jump and then kicking their legs so they would fall flat on their face. So I did take some time to talk about TikToks and challenges, and not, even these were with my 4th and 5th graders, and not doing challenges without checking with your grown-ups. And most of them laugh at me, and I say, well, that's fine, but sometimes you're doing challenges that you don't realize are dangerous. And so, if you did this challenge thinking it's completely funny, and you kicked my feet under, and I fell and I broke my nose, or I fell back and had a concussion, there are serious consequences that you might not have thought about. So it's important to have those conversations. So sometimes when something like that comes up, you might deviate just to kind of put that in. You'll get lots of conversation, lots of comments, but you have to sort of gauge that for yourself. And if you feel like we did this in 4th grade, they just had it in school last week, you might have the opportunity to just do a little deviation. Not a big one, just a little. Talk about something that's relevant. Any questions about that? Boundary setting. So we're encouraging them to say no, set their boundary, tell somebody if their boundaries are being violated. So the next thing we're going to talk about is secrets and surprises. And now I am sure, as big 4th or 5th graders, that you know all about secrets and surprises, so you get to tell me about this one. Who can tell me what a surprise is? Something you don't know is happening? What if, is it a surprise usually a good or a bad thing? It's usually a good thing. Is a surprise something that you keep for a short period of time or for a long period of time? Short period of time, right? So surprises are things that we are excited about, that are short periods of time that we keep them to ourselves and then everybody knows about. Usually it doesn't make us feel sad, scared, or worried. Sometimes we're excited and we want to tell somebody, but we're not sad, scared, or worried about having that surprise. So sometimes people think about that or talk about that as good secrets, but we're going to talk about that as surprises. Because when we think about a secret, what is a secret? Right, something that you are not supposed to tell anybody. And usually when you have a secret to keep, is it something that people are gonna find out about soon? No. So usually when people think about secrets, secrets are things you're supposed to keep forever. And here's the problem with that. Because usually if you're talking about something that you're supposed to keep forever, why are you supposed to keep it a secret forever? Because it's not a good thing, right? So the important thing to remember is that secrets, no secret should be forever. So if somebody gives you a secret and says, don't tell, what should you probably do? Tell, right? Because if somebody is being hurt, if you're being hurt, if somebody's going to hurt somebody else or somebody's going to hurt themselves, that's something that you must tell. And the thing usually about secrets is when we get a secret, somebody gives us a secret, how do we usually feel? Sad, scared, or worried. So if somebody gives you any information that makes you feel sad, scared, or worried, it is really important to tell. Now, as a side note, just again because of time, what we're going to do next, I would either have them do in a group or like in small groups, or write. You want this next piece on black and white so that they can see it. So however you would choose to do that, either as a large group or in small groups. So as 4th and 5th graders, I would imagine that by this time in your life, you probably know a secret or two. And I'm saying to you, you need to tell your secrets. And what are most of you probably thinking? I am not telling my secret. And that's usually what happens. The older we get, the harder it gets to tell things that we're supposed to tell. So let's talk about that. So why don't kids tell their secrets?
They don't want to be tattletales.
Okay, they don't want to be tattletales. Absolutely.
I don't want to get my friend in trouble.
I don't want to get my friend in trouble.
It's embarrassing.
It's embarrassing. Right, I'm afraid. I'm afraid I'm going to get in trouble. I'm afraid they're going to get in trouble. What else are you afraid about? Consequences. Getting somebody else in trouble. Right? What do friends sometimes say to friends? I'm going to tell you something. If you tell anybody, I won't be your friend anymore. Right? So these are all reasons people don't tell their secrets. But what happens when your friend gives you this big secret that's making you feel sad, scared, or worried? What happens to you? You get sad. You get stressed, right? And what can happen if we don't tell some of our secrets? Somebody could get hurt. And so as hard as it is sometimes to make those choices, we have to be brave and we have to tell our secrets so that somebody else doesn't get hurt, or if we're being hurt, the hurt can stop. And sometimes we do have to take the risk that somebody will be mad at us. But it's because we care about that other person, or we don't want to be hurt anymore, and we have to tell and get the help that we need. Now, as 4th and 5th graders, you probably know the difference between tattling and telling, but let's just make sure. Is there a difference between tattling and telling? Well, that's a really good question, Miss Kelly. Yes, it is. So what we say is there is a difference. Tattling is when you're telling to get someone in trouble, like purposefully. Telling is when somebody is being hurt and they need help. So if your goal is to get somebody help, including yourself, that is telling. If your goal is to get somebody in trouble, that is tattling. So if somebody's taking, if somebody is reading their comic book instead of doing their math page, and you tell the teacher, is that tattling or telling? Tattling. If somebody says to your friend, I'm going to get you after school today, is that tattling or telling? That's telling, okay? And if you're not sure if you're tattling or telling, what should you do? You should tell anyway and let the grown-up decide what needs to happen. All right? Any questions about telling? Okay, great. Then we will move on. Okay, this is actually perfect. This will be the last thing, and then we'll do lunch. So, what we're going to talk about next is our uh-oh feeling. Has anybody ever heard of their uh-oh feeling? So this is so God gave us our feelings, right? They're really important, but our uh-oh feeling is God's sort of gift to us to keep us safe. It's our alarm system, right? So when we get that uh-oh feeling, what usually happens to our body? You get butterflies in your stomach. What else happens? You sweat. What else? You get nervous. Goosebumps, right? You might cry. Your heart beats fast, right? So this is your body saying, whoa, whoa, emergency, you need to do something, right? And so that something is either get out of that situation, or tell somebody as soon as you can. So should you ignore your uh-oh feeling? No, right? So if the alarm in the church goes off, fire alarm goes off, am I going to tell you, oh, that's probably fine, just sit here, we'll be good? Am I going to tell you that? No. What are we going to do? We're going to leave. And why are we going to leave? To be safe, right? Now, how many of you have had a fire alarm go off and it was a drill? Right? We've all had that, right? You do it every day, not every day. Oh, Lord, could you imagine you do it every day at school? You do it a lot at school. You have your fire alarm drills so that you know what to do if there's actual fire. Does your teacher ever say, oh, this is just a drill, sit down? No. We practice, practice, practice. So even if you're not sure, if you get this gut feeling about something and you're like, should you say and ignore it, or should you just get out of that situation anyway? So I'm going to give you an example. I do not like, okay, so maybe this is not a good example in today's world. I do not like Halloween masks. I don't like when people have things completely covering their faces. I used to just say masks, can't say that anymore. I don't like Halloween masks. I don't like when people wear masks. So I don't like Halloween, and I really don't like when people have masks covering their face. So one day I was in the dollar store, and I went in and I was doing my shopping, and it wasn't Halloween, and somebody came in with a scream mask. You know the scream masks? Everybody knows what scream is because it's coming back. The scream mask on their face. So what do you think happened to my body? Right. Did I get the uh-oh feeling? Yes. So I did. My heart started racing, and I started sweating, and I said to myself, get out. It was time to leave. And I did. I put all my stuff down, and I very nicely left. And I listened to my gut. Now, did anything happen in the dollar store? No. It was like a false alarm. But it was still important that I trusted my instinct and I left that situation, because you just don't know. And that is God's way of saying, hey, danger, danger, danger. It's time to go. And if you can't always get out of a situation that is giving you an uh-oh feeling, so maybe somebody is touching you in a way that makes your heart beat fast and makes you sweat and makes your belly hurt, and you can't get away from that situation, what should you do as soon as you can? Tell somebody. One more thing about telling that's really important. So let's say that someone has given you a secret touch. Either they hit you so hard they left bruises on your body, or they're touching your private places without a good reason. And they said, don't you tell. And this happened last summer while you were visiting somebody and staying with them. So it happened last summer, and it happened 5 times. And you still haven't told anybody. Is it your fault? Well, it happened 5 times. And you didn't tell. Is it your fault? No. So I'm here to tell you that your 4th and 5th graders, if you say that twice, just like I did, they will say, oh, yeah. Right? Because when you ask a question more than once, when they've given you an answer, and you ask that question again, they will think that you want them to change their answer. This is also a PS prosecutor trick that people do with kids when they're trying to trick them. They will ask the same question over and over again, and they will almost every single time, if you ask the question 5 times in a short amount of time, you'll get the child to change their answer. Try it at home. Experiment. Anyway, so it's important to do that because you really want them to think about that question. You really want them to think about that answer. So why isn't it your fault? You let it happen. And you decide. It happened 5 times. Try not to say you let it happen 5 times. If another child says that, that's fine, but try as the adult not to say those words. So it happened 5 times and you didn't tell. You were there the whole summer. So why isn't it your fault then? Right. Right, so this is what you want them to get to. Abuse is never your fault. That's what you want them to naturally say. You might have to pull, but you want them to say it. And then you said, right, they told me not to tell. Right, and that is a valid answer. They told me not to tell. I wasn't supposed to tell anybody. And then you would say, well, we talked about that, right? We talked about how hard it is sometimes to tell secrets, even when we get that uh-oh feeling. But why is it important that we tell? See, that's a trick question because we're not with that person anymore. Why is it important that we tell? Because it's wrong. Abuse is never okay. And we want to make sure that the person who hurt us isn't hurting anybody else. And as you're older, the older kids need to hear that message too. All right? So that, because sometimes kids will feel like, well, I'm never going to see that person again. It's all, yeah, I can just forget about it, which we all know they can't. But it's also to let them know we want to make sure that the person isn't hurting anybody else. Any questions about that? So you do want to push them, and you wanted them to get them to say child abuse is never your fault. It's never okay. It doesn't matter how many times it happened, how long ago it happens. You want to make sure that you tell. And then I also say that sometimes, it takes a little while for us to get courage and be brave enough to tell, and that is okay. It doesn't matter if it happened 3 years ago or it happened yesterday. If somebody's hurting you, you want to tell. It's important to tell, and it's not your fault if it took 3 years for you to tell. Sometimes we just needed to get our courage up.